All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our virtual roundtable today, the future of housing, a key topic for all of us on all of our campuses as we begin to try to plan for what's next, whether that be summer or in this case, planning for the next academic term, which here in the United States is the fall. My name is Spencer Giese. I'm a research education specialist at ACUHO, and I'm here to make sure we can get this session started great. As you're looking in your Zoom menu, a couple things to help us as we move along today. First item is your raised hand function. If you could click on your raised hand function to show me that you're able to hear us, you're able to see us, you should see webcam feeds from a variety of our panelists today. I'm seeing a lot of hands go up. That's great. Thank you for that. I'm going to lower those hands. And please know that we can use that raised hand function as we have conversations today. If you have a topic that you'd like to chime in on or share some feedback or approaches on, we can use that raised hand function to call on you and actually have you speak into the session. So please be aware of that. Also, before we get too far into it, I want to bring up the variety of ACUHO resources that we have out there for you on the topic of both COVID-19 and just planning for the future in general. On our YouTube channel, we have a variety of recordings from our previous virtual roundtables. We have a number of threads on our ACUHO online community that are dedicated to COVID-19 response on campuses. And we have our always growing COVID-19 resources page on our ACUHO page. So please feel free to check that out. Use those resources for you on what you're doing on your campuses. We will get to our moderator and panelists in just a moment, and I can't wait to have Chris be our moderator today and hear from our amazing panelists. But as we always share with our virtual roundtables, this is not your traditional webinar. You are not here to be talked at. We want you to engage and be a part of our virtual roundtable. And to do that, we ask that you use that Q&A function. You should have a Q&A tab on your Zoom menu, question and answer. That's also a great place for comments. That's where we really want you to be putting those questions you may have about the future of housing that you want to make sure you see us cover during our session today. On our Q&A thread, all attendees, all panelists can see those questions. And you are able to answer someone else's question to provide what you're seeing in your campus. You are also able to upvote a question. If you're like, darn, that is a great question, I want to make sure our panelists talk about that, upvote that question to the top. As you're posing a question in the Q&A, please put your name, title, just so we can better connect with you. We see through our virtual roundtables the amount of connection that members are able to have with each other across the nation and across the globe. So I look forward to you all having the opportunity to connect, share ideas, and really, grow community as we keep moving forward to keep dealing with what we're seeing on our college campuses. But you've heard enough from me so far, so I'm going to throw it over to Chris Silva, our moderator today on this virtual roundtable on the future of housing. So Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Spencer. And as Spencer already said, my name is Christopher Silva, and I'm the Director of Housing at American University in Washington, D.C. I serve as the chair of the newly formed ACUHO work group on the future of housing, and I'm your moderator. The goals of the roundtable today are for us to briefly review the results from survey number 4, for us to hear from senior housing officers and senior student affairs officers about the reactions on the results of the survey and the possible implementation of some of those models, as well as their concerns, looking at benefits and outcomes of these models. To answer questions and comments and obtain ideas from roundtable participants. And lastly, we want to share the next steps about the future of housing work group. I also want to take a moment to recognize that ACUHO represents campuses from all over the world with institutions of varying sizes, governance structures, some religiously affiliated institutions, HBCUs, HSIs, tribal colleges, and various others. And we want to make sure that the discussion today can incorporate different needs and different points of view. We also aim to incorporate these various identities in different types of institutions in the work of our work group due to the number of volunteers that have expressed interest in participating in this work. And now I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and then share brief remarks on where they are in their fall planning.
Good afternoon, everyone, and hi, friends. My name is Kathy Collins. I am currently serving the University of Rhode Island as its Vice President for Student Affairs. Previous, certainly extensive housing experience at different institutions around the country. And I am certainly, first and foremost, happy to participate today, and I hope everyone's well. In terms of our self-care and how we're taking care of ourselves and kind of the patience and the expectations we all need to lower in terms of how we're facing this. I know that's how I continue to approach this every day, with my team. Currently, I'm serving the state of Rhode Island on the governor's task force to reopen higher education across the state of Rhode Island. In addition to that, I have the great pleasure of leading a campus-wide team focused on our reopening of campus in terms of bringing staff, faculty, our labs app online, everything back so we're ready for the fall. We are planning for an on-campus fall with our students, but we know it's going to be different. We know that we may have a smaller capacity. We know that we may be engaging students different, and we're very closely monitoring our state guidelines as a public institution in terms of group size, social spacing, and all of those types of things. So really looking forward to your questions today and participating in this important event. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Beth Pesky from Purdue University. Am I coming across? Okay, couldn't see myself. Beth McCuskey, I'm Vice Provost for Student Life at Purdue University. I also had the pleasure of serving as the ACUHO president 3 years ago. We, like many institutions, made the decision to go remote around spring break, and so had the painful experience of basically closing down. Certainly we gave our students the opportunity to stay with us for the spring and have a host of ways that we're working to try to keep them safe. As we're preparing for fall, like Kathy's institution, we're also looking at being a full residential experience in the fall, and want to be ready to serve our students, and protect all of us from the disease at the same time, right? So recognizing that things will necessarily be different. Our president put together a task force that was led by 2 of our deans and included several of our research faculty who have background in infectious diseases and medicine and things along those lines, just to be able to kind of have that reality check from a research perspective of how we wanted to approach things for fall. So the task force recently completed its work, and now that is getting synthesized further. I think from my perspective, there are a couple things to think about. First, it's the institutional context and your ability to serve students in this type of environment, which is very nebulous and very uncertain. Second is the location that you're located as an institution, and your ties to your community, your ties to your state, your ties to other jurisdictions that will necessarily make public health decisions for where you are located. And then, of course, the local resources and the ability of the community at large, and as well as your own campus resources to take care of the population should something terrible happen and people do get ill. So really putting it in this context, as opposed to, there is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all here for anybody.
Good afternoon, friends. I'm Dan Peterson. It's a pleasure to be here. I serve as the Director of Housing and Residential Services at Northern Illinois University. We're situated about 70 miles outside of downtown Chicago. We're a regional comprehensive institution. Much like all of you, we reduced the footprint of our campus housing program by 90% in the course of 72 hours in the month of March, and we are actually finishing the last week of e-learning for the spring term, and our students move into final exams next week. So I don't have a whole lot to offer other than what Kathy and Beth have already talked about in terms of shared governance on our campus, the planning that's going on, not only to manage everything on a day-to-day basis, but be looking forward to summer into fall terms. But one of the unique aspects about our campus that's forefront in our mind is we have a significant amount of our incoming class are Pell eligible. In understanding the complexity of the larger economic stresses in this country right now and what that's going to do to our families going into the summer, and then make it more, even have more barriers to be able to entertain, the opportunity to come to a university and persist, is one of the things that we're also trying to navigate, on top of the logistical things related to face-to-face classroom instruction, spreading out the density of our campus. What does that look like residentially? What does that look like for student engagement? So there's a lot of complexity that we know that you're dealing with out there, and hopefully this hour will help provide you with some answers to that, or at least some comfort in knowing we're all in this together.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kendra Skinner, and I'm the Director of Residence Life at Southeast Missouri State University. We're located in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is on the Mississippi River in the southeast corner of the state, down near the Boot Heel. We are also a comprehensive regional state institution here in the state of Missouri, with a total campus population of about 10,000 students, and about 2,500 or so live on campus with us. We closed our residence halls right after spring break, and have about 50 students living on campus with us right now. So it's very spread out within one of our residence halls, and definitely not the residential experience that I expect that they were hoping for this spring. We obviously are looking towards the future as well, starting to turn some attentions to summer and what that means. The state of Missouri is reopening May 4th, this next Monday. So far, the university is planning to reopen. We've been teleworking since after spring break, and planning to reopen around May 18th, although that could change depending on how some things go. We obviously have been dealing with a lot of the same things that everyone else is as well. But I think the big things for us are some of the things that have recently been announced from our state and the governor's office, with some expected cuts that are already being announced for FY20, and expected loss of enrollment along with that. But to know that that we're going to have nearly $4 million in cuts to our budget from the university, on top of refunds and credits that have already been issued to students that we'll be dealing with here in FY20, and then additional cuts that are planned over the next 3 years. We're looking at about 25% reduction in state appropriations to our institution over the next 3 years, and are already beginning to have conversations about cuts that will happen within our divisions of about 12% across various divisions on campus here. And this is on top of obviously reductions that have already been made within my own department and across campus, as well as we've reduced our RA staff, our hall director staff, in order to meet budgets. And so lots of concerns around this that I'm sure everyone is dealing with, and in their own different ways, and trying to determine how we move forward, making best decisions without putting the burden on the backs of our students, and making sure that that we're still able to provide those quality residential experiences that we all want to provide, and just finding the best ways to do that. So hopefully we can answer some of those questions today, and learn what you all want to know, along with what we want to know, to help us all make the best decisions as we're moving forward.
Thank you, Kendra. And thank you all the panelists again for being here today. So I wanted to take a couple minutes just to go through the results of the survey, also called the straw poll number 4. And so this survey was answered last week by over 100 senior housing officers, and the full data is available on the ACUHO website for you to explore and look more into. For our discussions, we're going to be using this data to initiate our conversation. So one question related to how are campuses modeling their occupancy in the fall term. And so, as you can see, the majority of the campuses indicated that decisions hadn't yet been made regarding any adjustments to their modeling for the fall term, so that they were still unsure, they were considering this. However, 20% of the campuses, that's that black bar, the second one from the left, talked about that 20% of the campuses indicated that they would be decreasing their capacity for fall semester. So, and then going into a little bit more detail, which is our next set of data, was informing us that while 55% of the campuses, had indicated that no changes had been planned, there was still a substantial percentage of the campuses that indicated that they were planning for some change scenarios. And you can see some of those change scenarios are reduced sharing of common areas, considering placing just one student per bedroom, considering restrictions on guests, and which I know this is a really common topic of discussion among colleagues, is reducing capacity of traditional residence halls with communal bathrooms. So these are these green bars right here. Also in consideration, individuals looking at shared bedroom and bathrooms, perhaps also considering still sharing of common areas, but not as high as the other elements. And even some considering taking offline residence halls with communal bathrooms. And then the last two ones, one student per bathroom, which is also a different concern that we've heard. And the last one is no sharing of common areas. So as you can see, there's a spread across the different concerns, but still some very concrete ways that the campuses are looking at changing their capacity modeling for fall. And we asked the question about, how do these changes would impact, or the degree of the impact on a campus's ability to house students. You can see here in this there's lots of pieces of data in this model. And I encourage everyone to take a look at the data when they have some more time in the ACUHO website and the full report. But on average, the respondents indicated that they expect at least a 20% drop in their housing capacity. So that is the average up top in that black bar, the first one up top. So, and you can also see that the impact is greater on the campuses with lower capacity, so less than 3,000 students, as well as in public institutions and rural colleges and universities. We also asked a question about room selection, return student room selection, and if campuses had already conducted or were actively conducting or postponing room selection. The majority of respondents indicated that they had either already conducted or they were actively doing this. So less than 20% suggested that they had postponed, and with 5% unsure. The next data set, there are two questions here. They're specifically looking at finance and staffing. So the first one was about in summary, the amount of funds lost due to refunds or room charges that had been refunded to students, as well as the impact on capacity reduction. So when we look at collectively, there's an average of $6.6 million in lost revenue from now until the upcoming fall semester. And then the second data set there, which is this orange table, also indicating that campuses were foreseeing an average 6% drop number in their full-time staffing. So, and the last data piece was a question related to what strategies were campuses considering to accommodate potential COVID-19 quarantine and isolation spaces. So there were various models and elements discussed here. But one aspect that was worth mentioning here is the one on the left, which is the average number of beds designated for quarantine and isolation spaces. The average number was 40. We had a large spread from, as low as 18 and as high as 114 for campuses with more than 7,500 beds. But the average was 40. Some of these strategies that are mentioned here are varied, all the way from individual self-reporting, adjustment on new deliveries, providing PPE for residents, and as well as other adjustments of room capacity or utilizing external capacity to help offset the need for space. I encourage everyone to also explore more of this data, which is available on the ACUHO website. And so, based on this data that's been shared, I want to bring it back now to our panel. Any initial thoughts? What's your reaction to what our colleagues are saying in the field? And I'll invite Kathy to start if she has any initial thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. There's just so much unknown. I think that's the hard piece. And, we're in a business of knowing. We know how many beds we have. We know how to people in beds. We know how to build community. We know we're problem solvers. We're in a world of knowing. And that's what we've excelled at for all of these years and been so successful across ACUHO and the services and programs we provide all of our campuses. And now we are in this world of unknown. And I think that this just speaks to how our campus is going to respond to truly something that is different. And I think also, how are we thinking about operationalizing and transforming? Because now is also a time for us to really push ourselves in some ways in terms of change. There are some things maybe we wanted to change, or I think different ways we wanted to approach some of these things. So I see a lot of that in here. I think as we move forward, it's going to be focusing on, a couple key areas: testing, tracing and tracking, quarantining and isolating, meeting the needs of those who are quarantined. How are we going to ask our staff members and faculty and students to attest every day? I feel well today. I'm okay. And are we going to be screening at buildings? I saw a bill, I think, presented today on the floor by a Democrat out of Connecticut about expanding AmeriCorps so that they can be hired to actually do tracing. So what is that going to mean on our college campuses? How are we looking at that? And then for some of you, depending on the size of your university and resources you have on campus, I start looking at this and I'm like, wow, how many can test on campus? What's the size of your health services? What's the ability? Do you have a medical facility on campus? So I think it's wrapping our heads around all of these types of things, which I think I see some of the questions popping up and a lot of concern about capacity. Capacity, heads and beds drives our budgets, and we want to know about all those types of things. But there's all these other pieces as well too that we have to start wrapping our heads around too in terms of the bigger picture of our institutions, and start thinking about capacity and the impact that has. So I'm not sure in terms of this. As I said, there's a bad answer A, bad answer B, and the I don't know. They're my three responses lately to pretty much every question my staff is asking. But I'd be curious to any other panelists, what are you thinking or hearing as you see some of these questions?
I'll jump in. I think some of this comes down to scenario planning. I think we have to really be, you know, looking at the best case scenario. It's kind of close to business as usual. Maybe people will wear masks to class and we'll have smaller gatherings and that sort of thing, but it's pretty much business as usual. So what does that look like? And how do you tend to that number in your space, all the way to, you know, we're going to have very few people on campus or have to flip online, right? And if you look at what the Chronicle's keeping a list every day, if you haven't noticed, what institutions, how they're positioning their fall semester. So that's definitely worth a look. I think it runs the gamut. And as Kathy mentioned, I think we have to have certain capacities. The quarantine space is huge. It's not just space, it's the resources to take care of those students who are in quarantine. So, you know, how do you figure that out? Is it a simple percentage of your beds, a percentage of the people on your campus? It doesn't matter if you're a dense campus versus one that's further, you know, spread out further, where it's less likely that people will get sick. I think there's lots of factors in there. I don't think it's a simple X% of the beds that tie into that. The other element too is the community and the ability of the community to kind of backstop if there are a bunch of students that are sick. You know, can the local community help care for them if they need to be hospitalized and those sorts of things. So those are all considerations that I'm sure your campuses are exploring, as well as the public health authorities in your jurisdictions, as we make some of these decisions. But having not only having the scenarios kind of well thought out, but really thinking through, how do I pivot this if I have to move quickly, right? If we're totally planning to be online and then all of a sudden there's a miracle vaccine in July, right? How do we pivot back to near normal? And vice versa, if we think everything's going to be hunky-dory, as close to possible as what it normally is, and then something hits and we have to be ready to deal with it, how do we deal with it? So lots of options, scenarios, and the ability to move fast.
You're right. You're spot on, Beth. And at some point, our thinking is going to have to shift from the macro thinking to the micro thinking, right? Because if part of what we're trying to do for fall is deal with the new norm, which is to mitigate the spread of a virus, then most of our building service and custodial staffs are not in the queue to operate on a 24/7 model, right? So cleaning of surfaces is going to be very different from what our usual model is, and that comes at a cost. Student engagement. There'll be an expectation now within the student population that if social distancing is what we expect you to do, you're not following that. That becomes an enforcement issue now, right? That becomes an area, a very, very gray area of a code of student conduct that we haven't really navigated much in the past. So there's a lot of thinking that's going to have to go into how we manage our campuses and try to set up environments that are both supporting students in the classroom, but then dealing with the majority of the hours that are happening outside of the classroom, right?
I don't want to jump back on something I didn't mention. I think if you were planning what was happening in the spring, there's this realization that, oh my goodness, things are happening fast. We have to be ready. We have to shift gears. And if you recall, there was this whole kind of incredulousness around it that led into this kind of general acceptance that then led into this desire to change. We're going to have that same type of change situation with whatever we do in the fall, meaning, you know, if by saying we're open for fall, the expectation of our student body is that it's going to be coming back to life as normal, that's very unlikely, right? There will be different things that we'll have to deal with, whether it's wearing masks or smaller gatherings or no gatherings or limited travel or changes in calendars. I mean, all of these types of things are on the table. But what is important, I think, is that for everybody who joins the community to understand the impact of their own health decisions and pledge themselves, right, to stay healthy, to do all they can to stay healthy, and to recognize the impact of their behavior on others, because it is really a community-wide effort here. And it's going to be different, and we have to help people through communication and modeling recognize that things not the same as it was last fall. It's going to be different, and we have to adapt to that.
You know, I know
Yes.
certainly one of the things we've been talking about is how do we disinfect spaces? How do we clean? And getting to what Dan just said, and certainly what Beth said, is we're talking about every meeting room, every classroom has to be disinfected in between uses. Well, is that the staff doing that? Is that we have the bottle of wipes there if we can find them, and people wipe down in between uses? So it's really starting to wrap your head around the mitigation, the response, the care, the community care, and how do we continue to build community in all of this space and show that we care. The other piece is, depending on what state you're in, if you still have domestic or international travel restrictions. So are you going to be bringing in students 2 weeks early to quarantine for 2 weeks before then they enter the community and go to class? What does that look like? You know, fall sports teams, what is, you know, so you start to have these conversations in regards to kind of what, how do we wrap our heads around all of the questions that we have? Who are the best people to help answer those? And I just said to some of my team today, we've got to take one bite of the elephant at a time. The elephant is huge. We just have to start, what's the next question? What's the next question? And start kind of addressing that way. So I'm so glad for ACUHO for pulling this together today to start kind of taking some of those bites, because these are some really important questions.
Thank you, Kathy. And connected to different elements that you all have been mentioning, there's this, it seems like that we're at this concept of that for this to work, we all have to work together. And there's a set of expectations and how we communicate these expectations with students and their families, that will likely have to change. I know we have talked for years about catering differently to students and the population, and how we recruit students to our campus, and some of us in private schools, depending on how our funding models function, that pressure may play a little bit different. But coming back to the point, how should we be thinking about how we communicate this expectation and this new reality to our students? Do you foresee that how we operate will change? How we operate within these expectations and requirements?
I think yes, and I think it's not just housing. I think campus is going to change. I think class sizes are going to change. I think labs are going to change. I think interactions and student activities are going to change, and athletics and campus recreation, intramurals. So I think we're in a larger context of how do we communicate. You know, for our first year students, it might be these expectations of what I think college is going to be like when I get on campus and this experience, let alone some of the students who may be coming to our campuses in their fall, if we can house them, if they're coming, never even maybe came to campus. You know, so we also have this experience of people coming into our community who maybe at 25% or more of your population have lower expectations. Some of your upper class students are going to expect it to be quote unquote the same as how it was before, but it's keeping in mind that change is happening across the institution as on a broader scope. Like, what if class sizes can't be larger than 50? I looked at like a Beth at a Purdue or some of our other campuses where we have these huge auditoriums and classes. So I've already told my staff, for example, and the Memorial Union, don't book anything in the fall. I think all of our rooms are going to be used for classes. What does that mean? So I think, what if we're doing Saturday classes to spread things out even more? So I'd be curious what some other people are thinking, but I think we have to communicate the change, but it's a broader change about the overall campus experience.
And to your point, Kathy, a lot of the things that we're trying to plan for and trying to navigate internally on our campuses is somewhat cards face down on the table, because what we can do is restricted by what our state or local government's doing, right? So in Illinois, we just, we were approaching the end of the first shelter at home order that was set to expire tomorrow. And last week, the governor extended it till the end of May. Well, certainly we haven't been sitting around waiting for that announcement. We've been planning and trying to think forward about what we could do. How do we communicate with our campus stakeholders, our summer groups? All of this stuff are things we're talking about, but you can't get out ahead of decisions that can completely wipe away everything you're trying to do. So it doesn't mean you can't, or that you shouldn't stop planning, But the communication piece of it is one of those things that you don't have a lot of flexibility or the ability to be nimble and get out ahead of things like we ordinarily would do. I think we're very good at, as a profession, of trying to anticipate, be transparent, get information out to folks. And this is one of these scenarios where that's fighting us, right? That's one of the major obstacles of being able to do business the way we're used to doing it.
And I think a lot of the ways that we used to do some of the things are to bring some people together to share some of that. You know, so you think about your RAs and pulling floors together at the beginning of the semester to share, you know, expectations on living on campus or being a community member. And we may not be able to do that. And so do we need to look at a virtual method to do that? What can we share ahead of time versus what needs to be shared when they get to campus, and then what needs to be continually shared? I think I saw something earlier about someone thinking, you know, trying to think outside the box and how can we do things that maybe are clings and stuck to mirrors to remind people as they're going into bathrooms or various places around campus, you know, just to say, hey, remember social distancing, you know, you need to think about some of these things, and how do we plan for some of that and make sure that we're sharing that. But it does all feel very foreign because some of the things that we're so used to doing to bringing our students together are maybe some things that we aren't going to be able to do. And I think that makes it much more difficult for us to start to think about how we really start to communicate this, because we know we're going to have to do it on so many different fronts.
I think it would be helpful to create a list of timelines and decision dates, and have the kind of the communication that needs to go out with each of those different levels, and that helps really kind of respond to the things in a timely manner and gives you the maximum amount of time to be making the decisions on campus as well. The communication piece in my mind is one of the crucial things. I think we need to set a new normal set of expectations. And that's true that's life on campus. That's life in general. That's going into the grocery store. That's going to a restaurant, right? So what does this mean on our campuses, and how do we set the tone for that? I also think we haven't talked much about the RA role, but I do think we're going to have to really think about how that role, how that individual fits into kind of this new normal of health management for our community, right? And so do they have a role in helping with you know, maintaining health of their floors, whatever that looks like? Maybe it's tracking certain things, or you know, just keeping an eye out for sick students. Maybe it's keeping track of the temperatures, right? Temperature checks. That's an idea that's been floating around out there. And so how do we, I think there's this level of intrusiveness that we just haven't had with health in the past, particularly with HIPAA, that in order to be ready, we're going to have to change some things about expectations of people reporting when they're ill, understanding how to, you know, you stay home when you're sick, you don't go out when you're sick, that sort of thing. So just a whole new normal around health education. And then, you know, how do we staff for that? How do we make decisions around that for our communities?
And Beth, thank you for kind of segueing us into this discussion about staffing, because it's one question we've, in the chat as well as in other conversations, not just the student staffing, but also the professional staffing, especially the that graduate hall director or the professional hall director, community director, about what do you see the role changing, and also how do we add here the perspective too that due to lower enrollments, lower capacity, it may impact our staffing model. Not just based on the staff members that I've mentioned, but also our whole staffing matrix may look different. How are you thinking about this right now?
So I think it makes sense. I'm looking at this really at the divisional level too. We're not going to be able to do everything that we always do, especially if we're planning scenario plans where we have to be able to pivot quickly, right? So it's identifying the key things that need to be done And in this type of an environment, there will necessarily be new things added to the list, particularly around the health of the community, right? And the health of the individual. You know, it's more than just our work in kind of the wellness approach. We're, you know, it's kind of life and death in some cases, right? In terms of spreading this, stopping the spread of the disease. So figuring out, I certainly don't have all the answers, but I think that there's absolutely positively a role for our teams to play in how we structure the expectations of you know, what it means to be part of our on-campus community, and then how our staff help to not just enforce, but facilitate those expectations. And I also think over time, expectations will change. I mean, if you think of the things that you read about COVID just a month ago or 2 months ago, and the new things that are coming out as we learn more about the disease, you know, we're going to need to be able to adapt to that information. We're going to need to be able to have our students understand that adaptation. And I think in the residential space, at least, we're kind of on the front lines and helping to translate those changes and make them real.
I can say from a staffing standpoint, we were about to head into RA selection when we were closing our residence halls. And so that process got delayed a few weeks, and we actually made that happen last week via Zoom, obviously with our staff. And we made the decision to underhire. And so we were very strategic and took a look at where we had some spaces that maybe might not get opened, or if we make a decision to change how we look at our occupancy and to go to all singles all across campus, you know, then that would allow us to have the staffing in place. But then if we were mostly business as usual with double occupancies, we knew we could go into an alternate pool to hire. So we were trying to make the best decisions with the information that we have, you know, at this time, you know, without having to offer positions to people and then potentially rescinding them, because we would not want to do that. And so made those decisions that way. And unfortunately, we'd already reduced our hall director staff due to some budget concerns and related to FLSA. And so we've already, we're planning to have hall directors responsible for more than one building beginning this next fall. And so some of these things kind of worked into our favor that way, I guess. But there's still the potential. I know many of us have hiring freezes, and so whether people who have open positions will be able to fill them could be you know, a greater question for a lot of people, that we may want to, but we may not have the ability to do that either.
I also think, and having conversations with some of my colleagues across New England the other night, a lot of institutions are starting to really think about, how do I look at my staffing that I have predominantly in housing and some other areas? And is there a way to engage if we have a lower occupancy? Is there a way to engage people in academic advising and assistance in meeting the academic mission of the institution? We have this expertise. We're phenomenal at building community and student success focused. So is there a way actually to look at this broadly? So not only is Beth was saying in regards to, yeah, we're probably going to have to learn and work very closely with our health services staff and what we get from ACUHO and their professional association. But we also might want to think about, do we pivot a little bit? And some of campuses are already doing this. What is the role our staff plays in that academic mission? And the role that we play around student success, I think, becomes even more important, even when there's nuances about health education and other things that we have to start thinking about. But these are exact topics to start engaging residence education staff in and start having these conversations. And as Beth was saying earlier, the tabletops, the scenarios, are you going to be everyone in singles, some doubles? You know, how do you start running these, and what are those models? And just actually prior to this, I was with our housing staff and dining staff and health services across our division, looking at some scenario modeling, because we're running budgets, we're running those types of things. So what does that look like, and how do you come together with that? But there's a lot of ways for us to be of service and continue to build the amazing work we do at our institution and helping move the academic mission forward.
Kat, I think you're spot on, because I'm starting to think in my head about, you know, a return to face-to-face instruction, but there's probably going to be a very huge gap in the ability for students to have academic services in the way that we usually construct them. And what talents do my staff that are already going to be asked to be here on campus, what expertise do they have to where maybe they could fulfill things that a writing center used to do? Or do any of my staff have undergraduate degrees in STEM areas where they could provide some of their office hours that are now, tutoring hours instead of conduct hours? So really trying to think outside of the box there, because it serves a couple of things, right? It helps validate the importance of the residential experience, but from a safety standpoint, it's still reducing the number of people that are having to have face-to-face contact on campus when one person can maybe serve 3 functions for a university in the course of an hour.
Thank you. And we have a tremendous number of questions here that I know we want to get to, but we won't have time to. And we are working on, with our work group on utilizing these questions, this feedback, these ideas on creating our resources. And so before we move forward, I did want to ask from our panelists to give us some I would say parting words and parting wisdom about, given all this information, the situation where we are, where do we go from here, and how do we remain optimistic in this time?
What a wonderful question. And I think that there's so much to be optimistic about. But I also have said a couple times to certainly the team here at URI, hope's not a strategy. So it's good to have hope, but what is our plan and how do we approach this? So I think for us, it's really looking at what's the capacity that we can do? What's our bandwidth? How are we going to assist in terms of the health of the institution, the health of our students and our community members, keeping in mind we also have aging staff that are in the most vulnerable populations. So it's really wrapping our heads around all of this. It's continuing to dialogue in terms of this and make decisions together. If there's opportunities that you can work together across, the Big 10, the Big 12, across the SEC, across a state, Rhode Island coming together. I know our directors are meeting on a regular basis, and I thank Beth for pulling that group together. And so I think there's these things. How do we start working on this together so we're not doing this in isolation? But also keep in mind across your institution, you have to be having those conversations with your provosts. What are they thinking about class sizes? What are they thinking about the enrollment? How are you working with health services? Are you having conversations with human resources? And what are those conversations like in terms of working with human resources? So we're great at collaborating. We have to collaborate and dialogue even more now than I think we've ever done before. So it's going to be open collaboration, communication. We're not making decisions in a vacuum. And know that, I think my record so far is one day I started 30 emails and didn't send them because something had changed by the time I was supposed to send them. I think 32 was the exact number. So also asking for patience. I know I'm sending out an email today. It's probably going to change by tomorrow, but being transparent and open and upfront about that we've never done this before. None of us have ever been here before, and we're all figuring this out as we go along. But people are in a way counting on us. So there's some pressure for us to do this and to continue to move forward. So events like this and others are going to be very beneficial to help people make these really, really tough decisions. And I think we're just getting started in some of the tough decisions. So.
For me, I think that the hope is always in our students, right? They're our future, and we have some role in helping them at a very transformative time in their lives become who they're going to be for the rest of their lives. I think it is hard right now. It's hard in dealing with the unknown. It's hard in dealing with the financial pressures that we're going to face. I think what's sustaining me is that there will be an end in sight. It might not look like there's an end in sight at the moment, but there will be some vaccine, or this nasty thing will work its way through the population to the point that, we'll be back to some variation in normal. I think the question becomes, what does that new normal look like, right? On the back end of COVID, how have we changed? How have we evolved? And I'm keeping kind of a journal through this period just to kind of see how, you know, where my thoughts are as decisions are being made, and hopefully be able to look back at that and kind of track how, you know, how I've grown and how I've changed as well. So I guess, you know, there is an end in sight. It's going to be tough sailing. I don't think otherwise. But I think we will be stronger for it. I think in the long haul, our higher education institutions will be stronger for it. And I think our students will absolutely be stronger for it, because they've spent their time on campus during one of the most unprecedented times in history.
I think in all this also, you want to be mindful of your staff as you're thinking forward and planning for the summer and for the fall. Make sure that while you're advocating for your students, advocate for your staff with equal tenacity. Their safety is just important as everybody else's. And everybody's dealing with a lot of different things out there, from parents to P3 partners to dining partners. And if there was ever a time where we deserve the ability to let the grace flow, now is that time. And we need to use that in every opportunity that we have, and lead by example, right? Do what you have to do to show humor, to show compassion, and to show caring for all your colleagues and for all your staff, because we will get on the other side of this stuff. But during the times where the pressures just seem to mount day after day after day, that's the time when you need to take a break, walk away from it, and figure out how do you come back at this thing with your head on straight.
I think for me, you know, is really just seeing the power of this community from ACUHO and the information that we're getting from each other and from the association has been so helpful for me to see where other people are going, what they're thinking about, what am I not thinking about and should be thinking about. Those things have been so important to me, and I feel that sometimes we're not always the best at sharing specific information, but that's completely been thrown out the window with this. I feel like everyone is out there trying to support everyone else, and I would hope that that will continue as we're all grappling with how to best serve our students and make this happen at our institutions. And I know that in the end, there's not going to be one size fits all solution to this. We are all representing such varied institutions in such varied cities all across the nation and the globe. And we're going to have to come at this a little bit differently, and hopefully kind of through, you know, the power of community that we have, that we're able to find solutions that work for us, that meet the needs of our students and our student populations on our respective campuses, to be successful in the fall. And I hope that, you know, through the work of this work group, that, you know, that people share the information that they're looking to gather to help us as we're working through some of those things too, so we know what those questions are, to be able to research and gather that data for others to inform ourselves, but to inform all of you as well.
Thank you, Kendra, and thank you all the panelists for sharing their wisdom with us and their insight. Continuing this topic of supporting each other, I do want to share a little bit about our some next steps and some of the work that the Future of Housing Work Group is doing. So we do have a core team established, and we also have over 200 people who expressed interest in supporting the work group. So as we continue to develop our work, we will be tapping into that list of individuals who expressed interest, which really expands the world. And as Kendra was mentioning, our goal with this work group is to provide resources, actionable resources, frameworks to help you. And we can see from the comments provided in the Q&A, colleagues have the need for some very usable resources, not just comments or something to think about, but also something actionable that perhaps can save them time and can they can use and adjust based on their campus, but we'll support them in their operation. So that's that's our commitment, and that's the work that we're going to be doing in the next few weeks. So another element that I want to remind you is that every week there's a new survey, a new straw poll. Please participate if you're the senior housing officer, or encourage your senior housing officer to participate in that. The more data that we have in those straw polls, the better the data is for us to understand where campuses are. I really appreciate everyone participating, engaging in the discussion, and as well as our panelists for taking the time to be here. I know Spencer has a few closing notes for us, and we'll see everyone very soon. Spencer.
Certainly. And Chris, thank you so much for moderating. Kathy, Kendra, Dan, Beth, outstanding to have you share both your knowledge and what you're seeing on your campuses, and just helping to guide our future approach for what housing looks like as we move forward. As Chris alluded to, we have straw poll number 4, that data report. You can find that on our website. We have a number of data items being released there. You can see those timelines moving forward on screen. And also please check out our resource page on our ACUHO website to take a look at a variety of things, such as our YouTube recordings, online community threads, and what we have to offer as COVID-19 resources. Today, thank you for attending. We had over 460 people on this call. So we definitely appreciate all those questions. We've copied down all the questions that were submitted, and we'll be using those to move forward in sharing information and giving direction to what we do both in virtual roundtables and on the task force. Everyone who registered for this virtual roundtable will receive a post-event message. We will share with you a recording, a summary of the discussion, and then resources. So thank you for registering, thank you for attending, and you'll also be able to please point folks who were not able to join us today to our YouTube recording for this. So again, thank you for joining us, thanks for sticking with us, and we'll be providing more virtual roundtables again next week. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.